the temple that should not exist. In the autumn of 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was doing something that archaeologists do not usually do. He was digging a hole in a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, not because he expected to find anything. Local farmers had been turning up large stone blocks with their plows for years, and the blocks were strange, carved, deliberate, clearly artificial, and no one could explain them. Schmidt had been working in the region for years, cataloging prehistoric sites, and he had learned to pay attention when farmers told him things were strange. What he found at that hill, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of the modern city of Dintuanidianliurfa, was Göbekli Tepe. It broke every model we had for how human civilization developed. It broke them so thoroughly that more than 30 years after its discovery, archaeologists are still arguing about what it means. The site consists of a series of circular enclosures carved into the bedrock of a limestone hill in the Turkish region of Upper Mesopotamia. The enclosures are defined by massive T-shaped pillars, each standing approximately 3 to 6 meters tall, weighing between 10 and 20 tons, some of them even larger. The pillars are carved with reliefs depicting animals, foxes, serpents, boars, aurochs, gazelles, cranes, scorpions, and dozens of other species. Rendered with a technical skill and aesthetic sophistication that was not supposed to exist at this time, the dating was unambiguous. Burnt animal bones and organic materials found in association with the pillars have been radiocarbon dated repeatedly by multiple laboratories, using multiple methods. Göbekli Tepe was constructed approximately 9,600 years ago. This is at least 7,000 years before Stonehenge. It is 6,000 years before the first pyramids of Egypt. It is contemporary with, and in fact predates, the earliest known agricultural settlements of the Fertile Crescent. And here is the thing that has kept archaeologists awake at night ever since. It appears to have been built by hunter-gatherers. The problem with Göbekli Tepe. Let me explain why this is such a problem. The standard model of human social evolution dates back to the 19th century. It holds that human societies develop in a predictable sequence. First, there is the hunting and gathering stage, characterized by small, mobile bands. They had no permanent settlements, no social stratification, and no monumental architecture. Second, the agricultural revolution creates food surplus, which enables permanent settlement. It creates population density, which generates social stratification, which eventually produces the state. This is the sequence. Subsistence strategy determines social organization, which determines cultural complexity. It determines the capacity for large-scale collective projects. This model has been refined, challenged, and modified over the past century and a half, but its basic logic remains intact in most introductory archaeology textbooks. Monumental architecture is a product of civilization, and civilization is a product of agriculture. Göbekli Tepe breaks this model entirely. The site was not built by farmers, and the botanical evidence shows this clearly. Its builders were still primarily exploiting wild cereals and wild plants. They had not yet domesticated wheat or barley. The faunal evidence shows that they were hunting wild animals rather than raising livestock. Agriculture was not the basis of their subsistence, and yet they built something that is, by any definition, monumental. 20 or more circular enclosures and hundreds of tons of carved limestone. It was an organizational effort that would be impressive, even by modern standards. It required coordination, planning, and labor on a scale that no small band could sustain. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt argued that Göbekli Tepe was not a settlement. It was a ritual site where hunter-gatherer groups gathered periodically for ceremonies. He believed this was a pilgrimage site where bands came together in peace. They were united by shared ritual, and the act of building it was part of the ritual. This interpretation suggests something extraordinary about our past. The impulse to build monumental architecture predated the agricultural revolution. It did not emerge as a consequence of settled civilization. It was present in our species before we ever planted a single seed. The cult of the pillar. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe are arranged in circular patterns. Two large pillars stand in the center of each enclosure, facing each other. A ring of smaller pillars forms the outer boundary. The pillars are carved with relief sculptures that are among the oldest known. They are 6,000 years older than the carvings of Find, a Talft-Wind K, 7,000 years older than the carvings of Egypt, older than any carved stone monuments that had previously been known. The animal reliefs are remarkably detailed. A fox is wrapped around one pillar, its body following the curve of the stone. Its ears are pricked, its eye looking out at the viewer. A serpent winds through a series of interlocking circles. This motif will appear again and again in human art. A boar faces a vulture, an aurochs confronts a gazelle, a crane stands with its wings spread in a threat or a mating ritual. The technical skill is extraordinary, especially given the tools were stone, primarily obsidian, which is volcanic glass and quite sharp, but still stone. The carvings are not decorative in the sense of being background ornamentation. They are the primary focus, the message the pillar was designed to convey. The T-shape represents a human figure, a simplified torso and arms. The pillars are not just stones, they are statues. They are representations of gods, ancestors, or spirits, something the builders considered worth memorializing in stone. Who were these figures, and what did they represent? We have no idea, and this too is significant. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that the capacity for symbolic representation is not a product of civilization. It is at least 9,600 years old. The boy who carved the fox. I want to pause here and imagine what it would have been like to build this. The pillars were not carved in place. They were carved in a quarry on the hilltop, and then moved to their final positions. The quarry is still visible, and the partially carved pillars give us a sense of the process. A pillar was roughly shaped in the quarry, then maneuvered out of the pit. How exactly remains one of the mysteries of the site. Some believe they were slid on wooden rollers or levered along on stone sledges. Others propose more exotic methods, but this was a logistical challenge of enormous scale. It was not done by professionals, but by groups of hunter-gatherers. They invested months of labor in building something with no obvious material benefit. There were no homes at Göbekli Tepe, no evidence of permanent habitation, no storage facilities, no workshops, no kilns. As people came, they built. They left. The site was never a settlement, it was always a destination. Göbekli Tepe represents voluntary collective labor on a massive scale, organized by a society with no centralized authority, no state, no army. The answer, archaeologists believe, is ritual. Ritual provides a mechanism for mobilizing labor that does not require coercive authority. People work together to build a temple because they believe it is sacred. The ritual activity of building creates social bonds, and the ceremony is valuable. Medieval cathedrals were built by believers who contributed for generations, not because they were paid to do so, but because they believed. Göbekli Tepe suggests that the impulse to create sacred space is not a product of civilization. It is a precondition for it, the destruction of the sacred. Here is one of the most puzzling facts about Göbekli Tepe. It was deliberately buried. After being in use for 1,000 years, the builders filled in the enclosures. They filled them with rubble, debris, and soil, effectively burying them. New enclosures were built on top, and these too were eventually filled in and buried. The site was abandoned, and it sat under an artificial hill for 9,000 years. In 1994, Klaus Schmidt put a bulldozer into that mound and began to dig. He did not know what he would find. No one could have known. Why would a community deliberately bury their most sacred site? The honest answer is that we do not know, but there are theories. One suggests the burial represents a shift in religious belief. Old sacred spaces were no longer relevant. They needed to be sealed off. Another suggests it was a practical act. The enclosures were no longer safe. A third suggests the burial was itself a ritual act of closure, a deliberate ending, a final act of respect or farewell. What would human civilization have looked like if it had never been built? This is not a trivial question. It represents the earliest known evidence, the collective construction of sacred monumental space by non-agricultural societies. If it had not been built, the model of social evolution would remain intact. We would not know that hunter-gatherers could build temples, but Göbekli Tepe exists, and its existence demands that we revise our models. The temple did not come after the city, the temple may have come first. The sacred impulse may have driven the agricultural revolution, not the other way around. People gathered for ritual and may have gradually settled around those sites. The temple may have created the city, not the city the temple. This interpretation is speculative, it is not proven, but it is consistent with the evidence. and it is a reminder. The history of human civilization is not the simple, linear story. It is stranger, messier, and more wonderful than that. Göbekli Tepe is still being excavated, less than 5% has been explored. There are more enclosures, more pillars, more carvings, more mysteries. What else is down there? What else did these people know? We are going to spend the next century finding out. Every new discovery will make Göbekli Tepe stranger than we currently imagine. The pillar that was never finished. There is one pillar at Göbekli Tepe that was never finished. It lies in the quarry, half emerged from the bedrock, abandoned mid-carving. Its T-shape is roughed out. Its features are barely visible. It was left where it was being carved, and there it has remained for 9,600 years. We do not know why it was abandoned, if the carvers died, moved on, or simply stopped work. We do not know if a catastrophe or a shift in belief made them walk away. But there is something poignant about this unfinished pillar. It is a reminder that Göbekli Tepe was not built by a civilization. It was built by people who started something and did not finish it. People whose lives ended and whose work was taken up by others. They did not know that what they were building would outlast everything else. The pillar is the most human thing there. Evidence that this was made by people like us. People who began and did not complete, who planned and did not execute. It is a reminder of what we do not know, as 95% is still underground. What is down there? What pillars have not yet seen the light of day? The unfinished pillar is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. The site was not just built, it was used intensively for 1,000 years. During that time, the site was maintained, modified, and expanded. And then, at the end of this millennium, the site was deliberately buried, filled with rubble and debris, the sacred structures sealed beneath a mound. This sequence of build, use, and bury is itself a ritual. It is the complete arc of a sacred site, from foundation to interment. It suggests that Göbekli Tepe was not just a temple, but a living ritual. The people who buried it were performing a final act, a closing, a sealing. They were saying, this is finished, this is complete, this belongs to the past now. And then they walked away, and Göbekli Tepe sat in the dark for 9,000 years. What a wait it has been.